going price for a dinner with Sarah Palin at a recent charity affair was $63,000. That's one reason, perhaps, not to laugh at the ex-governor of Alaska. 2008 was quite definitely not the last we've seen of her. So says our next guest, Max Blumenthal. You may know Max's videos going where most liberals won't, to prayer meetings, hate rallies, gun shows with the extremist right. Now he's out with a book, Republican Gomorrah, Inside the Movement That Shattered the Party, shows how some small, determined, rather wacky seeming members of a minority actually came to control the GOP, and they're not done yet. The book's just hit the New York Times bestseller list. It's out now from Nation Books. Welcome to the program. Congratulations, Max.
Great to be here.
Let's start with where you begin and end the book. It's an interesting bookend. You begin with Eisenhower and a rather charming quote from a book apparently he carried around, where he says, faith is a holy cause, at least in part a substitute for lack of faith in ourselves. And you end with faith run amok and people anointing the doorway through which Obama is going to walk to his inauguration with holy oil for protest, as part of a protest against abortion or something. What gets us from there to here?
Right. Well, I start the book with Eisenhower warning about the rise of the radical right and guarding the Republican Party from his right flank, from the John Birch Society, which had labeled him and much of his cabinet as Soviet operatives, as communists. And he was concerned that the big tent of the Republican Party would turn into the one-ring circus that it does at the end of my book, or a vaudeville of doom and despair, which is something else that I demonstrate. Its transformation from a party that represented the hopes of America into a party that represented the fears. So the book really starts with the Republican Party bringing into its ranks figures from groups like Operation Rescue, like Randall Terry and Rob Schenck, who were at least indirectly responsible for anti-abortion terrorism during the 1980s and 1990s. And they were influenced by a fascinating character I talk about named Francis Schaeffer, who went from running a hippie commune in the Swiss Alps in the 1960s to evangelizing Republicans in Washington about the need to oppose abortion and how that should be the means to undermine the secular establishment.
People who are the main characters in your book, people like Schaeffer, are not the people we normally see written about in histories of the extreme right. It's not the Falwells, not just the Paul Weyrichs. It's people like Schaeffer and Amundsen and Rushdoony, people that most folks haven't heard of. Let's start with Amundsen. Prop 8, anti-gay marriage, overturned gay marriage in California. People know it was funded by the Mormon Church and others. But Amundsen, who was this guy and how much did he give to that cause and why?
Amundsen gave about $1 million to that cause, and he provided about 50% of the money, along with the Church of Latter-day Saints, to Prop 22, which was the forerunner to Prop 8, which banned gay marriage, same-sex marriage in California initially. Who is Howard F. Amundsen Jr.? If you live in Southern California, you'll know the name of his father, who was the founder of Washington Mutual, was a great philanthropist, but he died when Jr. was 18, leaving him $300 million. Amundsen Jr. promptly went crazy, literally, and wound up spending 2 years in a mental institution, the Menninger Clinic. And when he came out, he found order in his life and managed to stabilize himself somewhat through conversion to born-again Christianity and through the teachings of R.J. Rushdoony, who is an influential but little-known theocrat who became Amundsen's surrogate father. By 1985, Amundsen was on his way to becoming the sugar daddy of the Christian right, and he declared, "My goal is the total integration of biblical law into our everyday lives."
He also had money goals. He was there behind 209, affirmative action. He supported welfare reform. What's the connection?
Well, he's a businessman and he's a libertarian, and R.J. Rushdoony advocated replacing the federal government with all of its functionings, including road building, schooling, particularly schooling, because it's a means of Rushdoony saw it as a means of indoctrination. He sort of internalized the caricature that the right has of Obama and of healthcare. And so in order to attack the federal government, Amundsen introduced all of these ballot measures to undermine its ability to affect people's everyday lives. And the point was that the church would displace these functionings. So Rushdoony also influenced another figure, Marvin Olasky, who helped Bush create the Office of Faith-Based and Community Initiatives, where the church literally replaced the government's traditional role in social welfare. This is all according to the guidelines that Rushdoony mapped out. But Rushdoony also mapped out guidelines for replacing the government's role in criminal justice with Leviticus case law. And in that scenario, disobedient children, people who commit adultery, abortion doctors, loose women, blasphemers would all be executed by the firing squad, perhaps. I'd call this the Christian rights trigger option.
Now, a lot of people would run a mile from gatherings of some of these folks. You run right into the middle of them and record videos like this one. Let's play this one where you approach some of your favorites, actually, about your book. Take a look.
I have a chapter in here about the Palin campaign, and I talk about how she damaged McCain's campaign and how the extreme rhetoric at her rallies with you created an ugly spectacle that alienated a lot of Americans. I was wondering if I could get your reaction to that chapter. And I have a chapter about you in there and how you tricked religious right leaders into supporting Jack Abramoff's casinos. I was wondering what response you would have to that chapter.
Well, I haven't read the book, but as I've already publicly stated, working with a law firm that represented other gambling interests was a mistake, and I've apologized for it and said so publicly.
And so you regret. Do you think that hurt the Republican Party? Just last question, your actions with Jack Abramoff?
Ralph Reed, not that keen to talk to you there. What is your video strategy? It's taken you from gatherings like that, where you're pretty upfront about who you are and what you're doing, to rather undercover recordings like the ones you recorded at Sarah Palin's church.
Well, there I was just presenting them with these figures in my book, Republican Gomorrah, with my book, and telling them what I wrote about them and getting their reactions to it. And they didn't like it very much. And, you know, going to Sarah Palin's church was the only time I've really gone undercover, and it was because I was denied the opportunity to get the story as a journalist, and I thought that this church, where she spent 20 years of her life and formed her worldview, which she attended for 20 years, was an important story that the media, mainstream press, and the hundreds, if not thousands of reporters who breezed through Wasilla didn't do. But they weren't allowing reporters in there, they weren't allowing recorders in there, and they wouldn't even allow anyone to take notes. So I went in there, they were speaking in tongues. Bishop Thomas Muthi was on the pulpit. He was the man who anointed Sarah Palin against the spirit of witchcraft in 2005, a self-proclaimed witch hunter from Kenya. And I began speaking in tongues to insinuate myself into the crowd. And so, since I've never done it before, I just recited the names of the Jackson siblings.
What did it sound like?
Michael, Marlon, Tito, Janet, Latoya. And then I just, rattle off maybe some food names or something. Orville, Ruddenbacher, butter, popcorn, Not to mock speaking in tongues, but I'd never done it before. So I just said consecutive words, and it worked. I pulled out a small video camera to videotape Bishop Muthi comparing Palin to Queen Esther from the Bible, which is how they view her, and many people in the Christian right view Palin as Queen Esther, who is a beauty queen, who used her wiles to intercede for her people against the evil Haman. And they took it away from me. So I took out another video camera and just held it by my side and managed to capture what the atmosphere was like in this extreme Pentecostal church that she attended, and I have it. And it's in a video I have on YouTube called In the Land of Queen Esther.